All right. All right. So basically, the word bias here means is that something is taking cover or something taking side over one another. So a little bit of background about Harold Adam Innes. So he had a very typical background of scholars at the time. You know, he was raised in a rural community, one room in a schoolhouse. He studied economics and then shifted to communication, or studied political economy and shifted to communication. One of his very famous theories, one of his important theories at that time were the staple thesis. The staple thesis is basically how the Canadian economy was characterized by the production and circulation of one single good. So this product or this good could change over time, like again, fur, metals, agriculture, oil, but it's still one product. And it did not really help or benefit Canada in any way. It made it on the margin. Now imagine a store, you go to Walmart to buy all of your stuff. You can buy clothes, you can buy food, you can buy household products, whatever you want. Or you can spend a lot of time in the mall going to each individual store, one store for clothes, and then one store for food, and then one store for household items. The thing is, Canada was like those one item, and it decreased its financial benefit. Countries like Europe would rather import everything at the same time from one place rather than one thing at a time from China. So the staple thesis here again is a theory again that the Canadian economy historically relies on the production and exportation of one good in contrast to diverse economy, again making it more diverse. The basic rule of Canada as resource-based exporter was consistent over time, but again from a financial perspective it was not very helpful. Now, before Innes passed away, he wanted to put down all of his ideas and thoughts down into paper. So, one question that keeps popping up, how did Innes go from being a historian, like an economic geography, to a huge media theorist? But before moving on to oh, actually, this is right. So again, he thought that media and communication was very connected, right? So he started to, again, he as a media economist. Let me grab the whiteboard. Okay. Media economist, he studied paper and pulp economy. Then he was interested in finding out what products was related to these paper and pulp. So what were they? They were like newspapers and books. And then that made him even more interested in the actual media. He wanted to see, okay, if we keep cutting down trees to get paper to sell them, and this paper makes newspapers, what is actually written in these newspapers? He was more interested in the idea of, if we are using a lot of trees and a lot of products to make newspapers, are these newspapers actually useful to the people or not? So that was his main. Second, so again, he thought that newspapers publishing was just a natural extension from the paper industry. He also had some questions about communication that Innes posited that are very important in this regard, and communication researchers still looked at these questions. Now, before moving on the question, I want you to observe something. Now, the social history of communication media. Again, communication is just very important to maintain society. Now, in the communication media, or like again, media in general, like television, newspapers, radio, and so on, it's not about what is said, but about how it is communicated. Think about any of the news that you guys read or see on television. Most of the time, it's how I'm telling you this piece of information. How am I telling you to feel about it? How am I telling you to think about it? And so on. He had some 3 questions. Again, how do specific communication technologies operate? What presuppositions do they take from and impart to society? And what forms of power do they encourage? What kind of questions am I going to bring here? Sometimes I'm going to ask you to state the questions, state the 3 questions here, and basically tell me your opinion about them, or I can ask you to uh, ask one question and state the answer of this question. So starting with, how do these specific communication technologies operate? So again, there's bias of communication. So how heavy translates to how durable it is. So my laptop is light, I can take it with me anywhere. Think about monuments, like, old Indian monuments or old Egyptian monuments. Now it's really heavy, I cannot actually move it, but they stand over a long period of time. How durable it is thanks to, again, long of information it contains over time. Like in oral culture, remember the rocks that we have seen and the carves on the stone? They have been there for, again, thousands of years. What presuppositions do they take from and impart to society? Remember Europe and the printing press? A medium becomes dominant if the society has a demand for it. Same thing with any other medium. So the application of a particular medium in a given society will pull it in an established direction, which we'll see later with the Egyptian Empire and Roman Empire. So again, it's the expansion, bureaucracy, how the government works, and so on. What forms of power do they facilitate? Think about powerful mediums such as television. A lot of people could take information from television and just believe in it, no questions asked. So television actually until recently, maybe less than 20 years ago, was a very, very powerful medium where people would believe anything that is shared there. Now, the bias of communication, the word bias basically is how affects the patterns or forms of social interaction, about knowledge, perceptions of the people in a civilization, and so on. It involves a lot of items such as social, political, cultural, economic, and of course, psychological aspects. Now, Enos claims that each medium projects specific bias. So there is time bias or there is space bias. Now, Enos describes that each different society as having a distinctive media system, such as writing. So writing on paper, writing on stones, carving on stones. System that, again, in a significant way influences the development of this society or of this culture. So it is thought that each medium has, again, either time or space bias. Now, again, the word space bias means that it can travel through space, meaning that it's light and it's portable, and I could carry it over a large distance of time, such as books, newspapers, magazines, laptops, mobile phones, and so on. Time biased is more durable, more heavy, such as stone or clay, the pyramids, Taj Mahal. All of these are time-based. They cannot move, but they stand for a long period of time. So again, he derived some general principle from the word space bias and time bias. He derived general principles about what influences different types of media. So again, something like stone, clay, peppers, and the alphabet have on different social organizations of social structure in a country. So again, we said examples of space bias could be paper, telegraph. Examples of time bias is stone, rock carvings like we have seen in oral cultures, and so on. Space bias. Now, where are we? Now, we're going to talk about 2 cultures. We have Roman Empire You have the Egyptian Empire, and both were, they used to be like the Pharaoh Empire used to be very, very important cultures. So in a ancient Rome was able to be what we call expansionist. What does expansionist mean? That they are expanding over space. Now look, take a look at this. They were very powerful. They conquered a lot of countries in North Africa and South and West Europe. How did they do that? Egypt was also powerful, but they only stayed located in Egypt. Now in Egypt, there was a centralization of activities. Let me share with you a very interesting painting over here. Clear all my drawings. Okay. Now we're going to, show kind of a map of Egypt. Now, please excuse my drawing format. Now, that's the Mediterranean Sea. That's the Nile River. It looks like that. And it continues all the way down in Africa. And here is the Red Sea. All right. Again, just overall. Now, Egypt had centralized, gonna put it over here. They centralized all of their activities around one geographic area, which is the Nile River over here. All right, and they stayed there for just 4 years. All right, they stayed over the Nile River and the Delta, which is also over here. And they pretty much did not care about any of those areas. That was unutilized, unfortunately. So all else was just miles of desert. This led to the condition that the expansion was not very desirable. Now again, imagine you have water in these areas. I don't need to expansion. I have a great civilization located across the Nile River, so I really don't need to expand. Ancient Egypt developed this large scale of stone monument architecture all the way over the Nile. There's a lot of stone monuments all the way up to down across Egypt because again they decided to locate here for years. There are huge temples and architectural monuments that again that held the story and the culture and the history of ancient Egypt. A lot of these writing on the walls, eras of the ancient Egypt was in stone. Now Egypt's decline was actually marked by the spread of a new material innovation, which was papyrus. Remember papyrus from the writing culture? So imagine that you as a person, you have established a good system, all right? You're living a good life with this good system, but then suddenly someone tells you, hey, I actually have a better system than the one you have, than the one you are using. And that was the main problem, or one of the things that declined and that helped in declining of ancient Egypt, because they were merely focused on one medium, or what we call it the overconception of one medium. Now Roman Empire, they actually conquered Egypt for some time, and they were more materialistic. They were more expansionist. Papyrus again was ideal for more administrative work, geographical space, such as again the height and weight of their Roman Empire, right? But both of them, they used to be, again, both of them were very powerful entities, but then they died, right? They're not as powerful as before. Why? Because there's the concept of balance and of media. When you're done, I want you to please read page 142 of your reading. It has more details of this area. So India, for example, is considered as a very old country with a rich history. Do you guys think it's more space biased or time biased? So it started with time bias. Again, all of them are both right now. Most cultures are both biases, but previously it did heavily start at time bias because of all of the monuments and all of the architecture that it had. So I did hear these little table for you to again talk about the type of communication, the medium, and what kind of bias does it have. So writing, for example, actually is both. It could be time or space bias depending on the medium. So if it's paper, it's going to be space bias. If it's going to be writing on stone, it's going to be time biased. Now, Enos was very, very, very attached to oral tradition, all right? So he says, again, writing could be either both, but Enos's thought is that he believed that space bias eliminated public dialogue, eliminated storytelling, eliminated what we call, again, face-to-face interaction, the feelings and the emotions, and so on. It remains, again, the face-to-face interaction currently remains the only time-biased medium in our modern world. I personally agree with him because taking a look at online classes, so for me as Nurhan personally, I enjoy teaching in an actual physical classroom. It allows me to, have more face-to-face interaction with my students, look, see their faces, see their emotions, see how they are feeling towards me or towards the content, rather than using online feature where I cannot see you, I cannot tell if you are enjoying the lecture, if you're having fun with it or not. So we're missing a huge portion of actual face-to-face interaction being online. So Enos was very attached to oral tradition because, again, it allows more feelings and emotions to be shared. Then the oral discussion, again, involves personal contact and a consideration of others' feelings. Of course it is, right? Let's think about texting. Mechanized communication. Now, texting sometimes allows for a lot of misunderstanding. It doesn't send the proper message. That's why we use excessive emojis to be able to share our feelings or emotions. It's very mechanical. It does not have the human touch in it. Question that I asked last time, you guys. Is it time or space biased? Now, of course, it is space biased because, again, it has so many documents and it could be opened from anywhere in the world. I can send you an email in Canada and you can open in India, you can open it in Russia, whatever it is. So for space bias, Google involves changes, again, in a lot of things, in knowledge and education, acquisition. It could be considered, you can open it with so many languages and so on. And it is time biased because it depends on the media storage. Now, so far the researchers that we have is that hard drives live about 10 years maximum on average. And data persistence makes us have more permanent histories online. What you opened yesterday, you can open next year, or you can open 2 days or like two years before. Sometimes, of course, websites die or they crash or the link is not working anymore, but most of the time it would stay for a longer period of time. Now, we are disciplined because of, again, the errors, we self-police, our behavior is more policed closely, and so on. So Google does have some aspects of both biases. They have a little bit of time bias and a little bit of space bias. Let's start with a question. Again, the word monopoly, we talked about it before, the monopoly of knowledge. When the word monopoly is its own, here it means exclusive control by individuals. There's only one person or one company or one entity controlling a specific item. For example, you guys mentioned ICBC controlling car insurance and so on. Or you guys, or for example, someone like Mark Zuckerberg. Mark Zuckerberg owns Facebook, and then Facebook now owns WhatsApp and owns Instagram. So there's actually a big monopoly on the social media websites. One person owning 3 really big companies: Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp. And it's only economic concept that monopoly includes culture and politics. How is that? Let's see in a few minutes. We're also looking at where information is stored and from where it transmits to other parts. So everything that you upload on Facebook is now owned by Facebook. If anything that you upload on Instagram is owned by Instagram. So individuals, again, could be like someone like Mark Zuckerberg, celebrities, politicians, and so on. Individuals, again, are groups that control a specific production or circulation of knowledge. Again, like how, remember, knowledge and information is actionable and interpreted information. It tends to acquire more power to those who don't, meaning that if I have more knowledge and I have more information than other people, that means that I will always have more power than other people. Politicians is a huge example for that. They always will have more power than the normal citizens, and that means they will always have more authority over us. So the more information you have, the more power it gives you. This again, the ideas of monopolies. You're monopolized. Could be monopolized with a specific language, monopolized with a specific gender, such as having men having more power, or having, for example, in ancient Egypt, for example, men were the only one who would have education. That means that they would, again, have more authority and more power over women, right? So now, when that control over the product, now think about anything that has control over production. Look at your laptops and your computers. For the graphic card, there is, I think it's the graphic, I'm not a very computer person. There is, when you guys switch your laptop on, there's something called Intel. Now, actually, I don't know if you guys know this, but my husband told me about this. He's a computer engineer. And he said Intel is the only company in the world that produces or that manufactures this processor. So imagine there is no company in the whole world that can create this processor except for Intel. Is that monopoly of power or monopoly of knowledge? So if this company falls for any reason, what are we going to do? So I don't know how to produce something specific like computer processors, like graphic cards. If I don't have the knowledge, I really, there's nothing I can do about it, right? So when that control over the production circulation of knowledge becomes exclusive, means becomes owned by one person, we call it monopoly of knowledge. Now, of course, it contradicts oral tradition, because in oral tradition, we have to share information. Remember, in oral culture, people share their knowledge. Again, I'm someone who is who's very good at cooking, someone who's very good at hunting. They have interesting hunting skills. We will share this information so we are able to survive the welfare of the group. Time by time, when people became more individualistic, this sharing started to die. We call it here the scientific worldview. It became so dominant that people, again, that the way of viewing the world or viewing the West is considered a kind of monopoly. The more people grow in science, the more monopolized it gets. Now, people or other people in the West, in the East, talking about actually people like us, like me and you, we are considered more traditional or more religious. So now there are 5 sources of what we can call monopolies of knowledge, all right? Now let's start with master of complexity. What we mean with masters of complexity means that a specific type of science that is mastered by very skilled people or by very specific kind of people who has mastered this science. So, for example, non-alphabetic forms were a huge example of this. Only specific people would know Latin because it's a complex language, so only few people would have this information. Is it monopoly? Definitely, because only specific people know this. It's similar to ancient Egypt about the hieroglyphs. if only specific people know how to write and read hieroglyphic characters, so the common people or the commoners didn't know how to use it. This complexity, of course, discouraged the entry of amateurs into the field, meaning that if you take it as a hobby, you're not going to get it. Now, look at a current example. Now, look at medicine and doctors, right? We all could know some tips and tricks of medicine. Like if someone is having a fever, you can tell them, wash your head under cold water. Maybe you could take something for over the counter. It's okay to give some advice, but you cannot perform a surgery. Medicine and doctors have this mastery of a very complex field, a very complex science. Think about law. A friend of yours is maybe having some problems with their immigration process or their PR paper. You can give them some advice, but you can never help them to go to court. It's going to be a very terrible idea. So that, in a way, as a current example, works as a mastery of complexity. It's very specific, of course, but again, if we want to compare this to oral cultures was more shared, and all people share their skills and their knowledge and so on. The second source of monopolies of knowledge. So obviously, if one has a monopoly on access of raw material, the ownership of a land, for example, let's say I own a land and it has a lot of trees. And people were telling me, can we please buy some of your trees to make paper for the newspapers? And I'm like, no, I don't think so. So I actually can control the media or control the newspaper because I have control over the land. For example, how the Roman Catholic Church control of parchment production. They would have it. I can control the production. I control the paper mills. Same thing with Intel. The only production company that produces it. I control this material for media. So obviously, if one has a monopoly on access to raw materials, this one is more on a privileged position. Then we have performativity, the performance, predictive qualities. So performativity basically means, again, predictive qualities. Either I want things to make it happen or accurately predict what's going to happen. What's a good current example? Google. Google knows what we think of before we think of it. If you're talking about something, or if you, maybe you even Googled something, and then on Facebook you're gonna find the ad, or Instagram. So it's either, again, to make things happen or to predict how are they gonna happen. Egyptian priests, for example, they had the monopoly of performativity because they would, through their monopoly of writing, they were able to predict the flooding because writing was, again, prediction of their own mathematics. Now, again, how many times have you Googled something or you wanted to look for something and then you saw ads on Facebook and Instagram about that specific thing that you Googled? I'm trying to use you as a way of advertising my products. Speed. Now, I think it's two more spots. Yeah. So speed here is basically the advantage of being the first to know a particular piece of information. Newspapers had to be extremely quick in printing a piece of information or a piece of news. So again, because if I am slow, and other newspapers had the same news or same report, I'm going to die as a newspaper. So I had to be extremely quick. So of course, newspaper organizations have this by having reporters in so many locations at once. So each reporter around the world, when they know a piece of news, they had to do it right away. So when I used to be a journalist, for example, and I used to cover an event, I had to go, when I went home, I had to actually write this news right away, because if I could go to sleep, write it in the morning, but then all newspapers will write it. So we had to be very quick in publishing our news. Current example, of course, is Twitter. Twitter is really quick because now everyone can be a journalist, right? If you have Twitter, if you can always post your opinions, you can always share some information, you can always retweet from other people. So our power as information consumers, now me and you were all information consumers, we're always curious about what's happening across the world. Our power as information consumers, it keeps increasing day by day, and we want to become the first to know something, along of course with a journalist. This state of affairs of course began with radio, and then we have social media, we have smartphones that made this trend like growing. So again, of course, you're walking down the street and then you saw an accident. What's the first thing you're gonna do? You're gonna grab your phone and shoot this accident and then maybe upload it to Twitter or Facebook or something. Finally, the ability to afford high overhead costs. Now, wealth or capital is key. The money of the investment here, the capacity of organization to acquire new techniques. For example, Google bought YouTube in 2006, then they bought Keyhole, which is Google Earth 2004. Facebook bought WhatsApp, and then they bought Instagram. They actually wanted to buy, and Facebook wanted to buy another. Do you guys know WeChat? Actually, Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg wanted to buy WeChat, but the owner refused. Why did he want to buy WeChat? Because the more control I have over other social media applications, of course, the more monopoly I have. But the owners refused to sell it to them. So now the question is, with so many monopolies around us, do we really have choices in our selection? Concept of knowledge of monopoly helps us to avoid using Inness's idea in what we can constitute technological determinism. Have you heard about this term before? All right, so basically what technological determinist is you being under the influence or under the control of technology. Mostly again, like media determinism. For example, are we all technologically determinist to our mobile phones? Most of the time, the answer is going to be yes. Yeah. What happens the minute that you wake up, check your phone, right? What happens before you go to sleep? That you are technologically determinist. Well, again, what technological determinist is that you give a lot of power and you give a lot of control to this technology. For example, remember when I said about your memory and autocorrect? You keep your friends' numbers in mobile phone. You text and it autocorrects your phone. You put your important appointments and your important assignments on your phone, so your phone can give you a reminder that there's an appointment coming up. It gives you again notifications for like celebrations or birthdays and so on. So how much control does the mobile phone have on you? And then imagine if your battery dies, what do you do? Can you try to survive with your battery dead for a few hours or a day or 2 days? We really need our technology in our everyday life. So the concept of monopoly of knowledge here helps us to avoid what we call technological determinist. Is that correct? Actually, Ines, of course, like we established so far, he was very much against very much against monopoly of knowledge. But because of the monopoly of knowledge, we're technological determinists. Now again, monopoly of knowledge, like we said, Facebook owns half of the applications that we use, even all of them. Your smartphones, Bell, depending on what kind of company you are with. Now imagine you are so much dependent on your phone that you keep paying a company to keep your phone alive every month. I had a friend I had a student tell me once that my smartphone is my friend. So I told her, imagine, you're saying that smartphone is my friend, but imagine that you're paying your friend to stay in touch with you. Imagine if I have Raman as a friend, for example, and I keep paying her every month some money so she can stay my friend. That's the thing with mobile phones. We're paying companies. We're charging our mobile phones to keep my phone alive. So because my phone knows everything about me. And that is what technologically determinist is. Please, please, please keep this term in mind, because you are going to need it and you're going to use it in your exam. So please keep remembering what technological determinist is. All right. Okay. So how new media arises according to Enos. Now, of course, new media. Any kind of new media is a response to a particular social situation. Zoom as a new media is a response to COVID-19 shutting down universities or shutting down colleges. So any social situation results in the development of a new media application. Again, think about how Zoom was working before, but Zoom was highly developed after the COVID-19 situation. And of course, there was more more security measurements, more bandwidth to help more people be on Zoom at the same time, and so on. So in order to understand any medium, I don't only look at the physical characteristics, like again, Zoom, having it on your phone or on your laptop, but the way I am using it, the way it's employed, the way it's institutionalized. So for example, when Zoom first came out, a lot of people were concerned with the privacy issues excuse me, that Zoom had, because it was located in the US. Meaning that anything I record, anything that I put on the cloud will be stored on the US information. I don't actually record it on the cloud, so don't worry, I only record it on my computer, so I don't upload anything only at YouTube. So that was some of the concerns. So again, with any media that we look at a lot of things. Think about Instagram. Think about the Instagram models that we have, the physical characteristics. Now, how are young children utilizing Instagram and looking at it for, I'm pretty sure you have seen on Instagram people having really nice pictures. You know, they're always on vacations, they're always on the beach, and that actually affects a lot of young minds. They feel like, why am I not enjoying life like them, or why am I not pretty like them? So that affects, again, we look at again how this new media is being used. Right. And finally, his vision of media is described as what we call, again, dialectical or interactive, that he thinks media affects social development and social development affects media. You know, the pictures show that they're living a great life, and that,
Yes.
of course, affects the audiences.
Yes.
Right. And finally, his vision of media is described as what we call, again, dialectical or interactive, that he thinks media affects social development and social development affects media. Now, these statements, this is part also of your reading, that I might ask you a few questions on them in the exam, something like to basically analyze or go over some of these elements. So let's take a look at these together. Right, so constant changes in technologies, now think about any kind of technology, any kind of media, as they affect communications. They're a crucial factor in determining, of course, cultural values. Think about the cultural values that you guys have in India today versus the cultural values that you had 20 or 30 years ago. Difference between you and your parents. Shifts to new media of communication have been, of course, characterized by profound disturbances. Why? Again, it makes a little bit of disturbance in this cultural or social aspect. Again, think about young kids who are very in love with the idea of these Instagram models and the look and the beauty and so on, and giving unrealistic looks for how their body should look like, or their makeup and so on. An emphasis in continuity and time in contrast with, of course, space, the bureaucracy, the planning, the collectivism. Again, think about how our psychology and mentality has been changing because of our social media and because of smartphones. Again, talk with your parents and think about the differences that you guys have using smartphones and when they were young, your age. It has also become accused of media determinist, of technological determinist. Now, why is that? Now, this is a funny thing. How come he hated media so much, or he hated, not he hated media, but he hated what media did to the people. But at the same time, he was accused of being media determinist because as much as he disliked how media changed the people, he believed that there's a huge dependency of people on the media, or there's a huge dependency of people on technologies. And he thought this is real, this is actually happening, and it keeps on, the dependency keeps on growing. Media, of course, is the principal technologies determining the changes of social phenomena, anything social that changes us. Again, how people, again, talking about their mental anxieties, their issues. Some people would rather not talk on the phone and would rather text instead. People don't mind traveling for years because Skype and Zoom is helping us to stay in contact and all of this.